Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I have a bit of a confession to make, and I'm kind of hoping that you will all be able to help me out because I've just returned from an awesome conference in Utah, but a lack of direct flights meant I was on a 15-hour journey. But the problem is, I woke myself up several times snoring. Now, yes, I am a mild-mannered, easygoing guy, but I suspect I might have annoyed someone that possibly forgot their noise-cancelling headphones. So if we have anybody listening working in sleep tech or part of a sleep tech company, I want to hear from you. Also, if you're a plain snorer, message me now and I'll try to make us both feel a little bit better about our affliction. And after all, we're better than those who break wind on flights, right? You know who you are. But seriously, email me techblogwriter@outlook.com if you've got any help, advice, or you work around technology in that area. I'd love to hear from you. But on with today's show, and we are living in incredibly uncertain times right now. And we are increasingly seeing technology being used for nefarious purposes. So when I came across a company called DroneShield, which is an anti-drone company that uses artificial intelligence to basically jam or shoot drones out of the sky, I felt compelled to find out more. So I invited their US CEO, Matt McCrann, onto the podcast today to break down the type of attacks, potential risks, rising drone usage, and much more. And I'm also hoping he's going to elaborate on both the benefits and downfalls of drone usage and discuss how the use of drones will shift the type of attacks that we see in modern warfare too. And most importantly, learn more about how destructive drone attacks can be prevented. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the US so we can speak with Matt now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Matt McCrann. I'm the CEO of DroneShield LLC, the North American business unit of DroneShield Limited, and an Australian publicly traded defense company. We're located in Virginia, about 45 minutes west from Washington, D.C.
Awesome. And there's so much I'm looking forward to talking about today with you. But before I learn about any of the success of any of my guests, I always like to learn a little bit more about how they got where they are today. So how did you get here? What's your origin story and where did your passion for tech come from?
Sure. I imagine it's a little non-traditional, a lot of zigzagging throughout but I've always been interested in tech and engineering. And I think probably a good point of origin was when I was serving in the U.S. Navy. I had the opportunity to use technology and tools in the application of recognizing patterns among disparate data sets and trying to develop or discover the actionable intelligence within that data. And then when I left the Navy, I stayed pretty close to the defense industry at the cross-section of defense and emerging technologies and have been in that space since. So fast forward a couple of decades and here I am.
Oh, and it was that path that took you to DroneShield, which appeared on my radar when I read that it was an anti-drone company that uses AI to jam or shoot drones out of the sky. It sounds incredibly cool. But for people hearing about you for the very first time, can you just set the scene and tell me more about the company and the problems you solve with your tech?
Sure. So DroneShield is a AI company that develops multi-mission solutions. As mentioned, we're probably best known in the counter-drone or anti-drone space, where we develop capabilities that help others detect, identify, track, and protect from unmanned system threats, such as drones.
It's incredibly cool. And I've got to ask, who are your customers at DroneShield? Can you tell me a little bit more about them and the scale of issues that you help them with?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we cater to militaries, police, public safety, and commercial security providers. And our solutions are used to provide situational awareness for those users within their operational environment and to provide actionable intelligence so they can assess and respond accordingly when a threat is present in their airspace or on their perimeter. And again, the threats that we specialize in are unmanned systems. So think drones, unmanned ground vehicles or robots, and unmanned surface vessels.
And I'm curious, how big a rise are you seeing in UAS threatening safety, security and privacy? Because I suspect for most people listening, it's one of those areas they don't know too much about or get to hear about. But is it an increasing threat now?
Oh yes, without a doubt. And a lot of the news in our space involves the use of drones for lots of good projects. So we see a proliferation of the use of drones for commercial applications and even consumer or hobbyist. But as those technologies expand and become more easily accessible, they also become more easily accessible for what we would call bad actors trying to use those platforms and leverage that technology for a nefarious purpose. So it's a balance of encouraging and investing in the good applications while also mitigating and being aware of how this new technology can be used for not so good purposes.
And do you have any use cases that you could share just to help listeners understand how you help prevent problems that thankfully we don't get to hear about in areas such as, I think airports is a big one, for example, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. And yes, we wish we didn't hear as many reports of these bad or ill intent incidents. But yeah, touching on the airports that you mentioned, situations with drones intruding into that airspace when it's a no-fly zone, essentially for commercial or consumer drones. A notable incident, or one of the most notable incidents in that market, has been the situation in Gatwick, which took place a couple of years ago around the Christmas holiday. Because drones were spotted within the airport perimeter, they grounded that incident alone grounded flights for about 36 hours around the holidays. So canceled flights and people stuck at Gatwick, all because drones were flying around the airspace and preventing commercial airlines from taking off. We see this threat often in the airport space, but the threat looks different in different markets. I'll give the example of on the battlefield. In a military context, these unmanned systems are being used at an increasing amount or increasing frequency, and trying to understand and have that situational awareness of your operational space is critical for executing the mission and protecting troops. And then moving to more of a public safety use case, prisons and correctional institutions. They have an increasing issue with drones being used as a delivery platform for contraband. So these drones are flying over fence lines, often not seen or detected, and dropping weapons and drugs into the facility. And sometimes, as captured on some of the recent incidents, dropping these packages directly in the hands of inmates that are behind bars. So yeah, the threat is across multiple markets, and it's a good challenge and a noteworthy challenge to try to address and stay ahead of, for sure.
Yeah, I've heard examples of that with the prisons over here in the UK, and I remember what happened with Gatwick quite well too. Were you having any dealings with what happened in Gatwick as well? Were you involved?
Not beforehand, and that's part of the challenge, right? It's trying to implement and give our users these capabilities before they're needed. So that's been a huge challenge. Unfortunately, it's often with new technologies, implementation or adoption is more reactive than we would like.
Yeah. And as this is a tech podcast, can you tell me a bit more about the tech that makes it all possible? So let's say we've got an airport with drones flying around. What happens there and what's the tech behind it?
Yeah, so there's quite a few different approaches to counter drone or drone detect. At DroneShield, what we leverage is artificial intelligence and machine learning for the detection and classification of these drones. And in many cases, for the more complex solutions, it involves a level of sensor fusion. So basically, this is leveraging several different types of sensors. So think RF or radio frequency sensors paired with radar paired with cameras, both electro-optical and infrared, and bringing all of the information that these sensors see together to have a more comprehensive picture of what's going on or what the potential threat could be in that operational environment. And that's for the detection and situational awareness. On the mitigation side, when a threat is detected, what can you do about this? So we leverage what we would call electronic warfare or electronic countermeasure capabilities to mitigate the threat by disabling the communications link between drone and pilot or drone and controller, and essentially sending the drones back home to their point of origin or grounding them right where we engage with them.
And there's so much uncertainty everywhere in the world at the moment, from obviously everything that's happening in Ukraine to Somalia and Syria and Saudi Arabia and Yemen, etc. So I've got to ask, what keeps you awake at night, and what role do you see your tech continuing to play in helping protect people and keeping them?
And what keeps me up at night? Probably more than should, probably. But I think we touched on it. And you mentioned some of the scenarios that are playing out in the real world today. Getting capability into the hands of those users who need it before incidents arise is key. So trying to be proactive and preventative in nature instead of reactive. It's a huge challenge, and it involves lots of stakeholders, industry players like ourselves, but also government end users and policymakers. So there's lots of challenges or smaller challenges to solve in that overall picture. So finding a way to navigate that and to remain proactive and be ahead of potential threats, those are definitely things that keep not only myself up, but our team, because that's exactly why we do what we do.
And where do you go from here? What's next for you guys? Is there anything you can share about the road ahead, or what your big focus is right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a very detailed tech roadmap that we are excited about as we try to, like we just spoke about, staying ahead of that, but not being reactive in the sense of when threats pop up. It's understanding the underlying commercial technologies that those threats or bad actors could leverage to carry out their nefarious acts. It's understanding those commercial technologies and having a solution or an answer for those if those become some of the tools that are leveraged by bad actors. So we spend a lot of time on top of and alongside commercial technologies as they're evolving, and they're evolving very quickly in the drone space because of the commercial business and investment that industry is receiving. And then what do we do about that, or our approach to stay ahead of that threat? Well, it's developing adaptive solutions. So thinking a couple steps ahead and seeing how whatever we're building today can evolve if, say, the mission changes or the environment that this equipment is being used or these solutions are being used changes, or the threat profile changes. We're not trying to solve for one problem. We're trying to solve with a solution that can grow with the end user and adapt as the mission changes.
And we started the podcast today talking about your origin story. We've now come full circle. And I always like to ask my guests if there was a song, movie, book, or anything that has inspired or helped them in their career. And we'll add it to one of our wish lists or Spotify playlists, etc. So do you have a choice for us that we can leave our listeners on an inspirational?
Sure. I don't know how inspirational, but definitely fascinating in the space of AI. Is a book, Superintelligence, by Nick Bostrom, where he unpacks or covers artificial general intelligence. So not so much the narrow AI that is used often today, but more of that what's next or that end state for AI. And he covers the potential paths to AGI or artificial general intelligence and the implications of that if and when we achieve. So that's definitely a fascinating read. And then coming from a sales leadership background, I'll give another recommendation as far as books that can help on the career path. New Sales Simplified by Mike Weinberg. I can't recommend that highly enough. Salespeople that I've led in the past, because it provides a pretty straightforward sales framework to own your process, which is critical for anyone in business and working with end users and customers that wants to be a problem solver in their space more so than just a salesperson. So definitely those two, I think, although not related, worth checking out for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'll get those added to our Amazon wish list. And before I let you go, though, for anyone listening, just want to find out more information about DroneShield, the kind of work you're doing, maybe see a few videos of it in action or contact your team. What's the best starting point for that?
Yeah, sure. So DroneShield.com, one word, is probably the best place to start to see some of the solutions that we're developing, some videos of the products in action, and then the team behind the scenes and what we're working on. And then we're also very active on LinkedIn. So definitely worth a follow if you'd like to stay in touch with either the team or what we're working on.
Well, I love chatting with you today about the rising drone usage, the potential risks, and breaking down the different type of attacks, and more than anything, of course, for sharing your human story behind the whole lot there. So I wish you the best of luck for the rest of the year and beyond. It would be great to stay in touch, get you back on in the future, see how things are going. But more than anything, just thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. I appreciate the invite here. It was good to chat with you, and I look forward to the next round sometime.
What a cool tech story. And one of the reasons I enjoy recording this podcast every day is to learn more about how technology is solving problems that most of us seldom think about. And I think today's interview was a textbook example of just that. And I want to hear your stories too. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes. Keep your stories coming in. And remember, if you work in sleep tech, I especially want to hear from you. But thank you so much for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.